Thank you for joining me again today. In this Pilates mat routine, I'm going to be focusing on the pelvis. The pelvis is a very important structure of our body. We want to make sure that our pelvis has equal stability as well as mobility. And oftentimes we have one and not the other. Usually in women, I find that maybe we're a little bit more mobile or too mobile, that we don't have proper support for our low back. And therefore we could have low back pain, SI joint pain, even pain radiating down our legs and thighs to our feet. Other times I find that men often have a lot of stability and not enough mobility of their hips. Again, it can also lead to low back pain and tension. So it's really important to find a balance between the two. And how we're going to do that is this short segment today on just finding the stability and the mobility of our pelvis through just feeling our hips with our hands and just doing some subtle movements. So it's not so much of a workout session today as it is just a body awareness and trying to figure out how we can take this learning of our hips into other workouts, or whether it's daily living of gardening, sitting, taking care of children, whatever it is that you do. It's really important to always just kind of have a mind's eye on what our pelvis is doing in space and how we're moving through and with it. So go ahead and lie all the way down on your backs. Your feet will be sit bone distance apart and your knees will be bent. And just take some time, especially if you're lying on a wood floor like I am, to just relax your body into the floor. Maybe you might get a little adjustment as I just did with the spine. You can walk your feet a little bit closer into your body. And let's go ahead and place our hands right on our hip bones. Left hand on your left hip bone, right hand on your right hip bone. And if it helps you to close your eyes to kind of get centered into your pelvis, that works too. It works for me, I know that. So from here, we're just going to start to sway the knees right to left. Real simple. This is kind of 101 movements, that is. The movements are easy. However, the mind process of it can be a little bit tricky. Just trying to figure out what your pelvis is doing, right? So we're just going to move the knees from side to side, and I want you to feel how when the knees move to one side, the pelvis follows, right? And then as your pelvis moves to one side, your low back twists and follows as well. So as we're here, let's go ahead and stop the movement of our hips, stop the movement of your knees. And now to create that movement again, I want you to use your hands, just as more feedback. Push your left hand down into your left hip bone and feel like a teeter-totter, how that tips your hips. And then come back to center. Push your right hand down to your right hip bone and feel how it tips to the right like a teeter-totter. Do that a couple more times, just using your hands just to push your hips down. And it might take you a little bit to loosen up the low back and to loosen up the hips if you are in fact tighter in this area. And then go ahead and come back to center. Both hands on your hips. Now, this is a challenge for you, can you keep your pelvis nice and still like it's anchored into the floor and just move your knees from side to side? So your hands are now at your hips, not because they're moving them, but because you're trying to stay still. So our hands are giving us feedback to whether or not our hips are moving with those knees. Can you keep the hips anchored to the mat while the knees move from right to left? And then as you come back to center with the knees, we're going to reverse that. Can you keep the knees and the thighs stick straight and still as you move the hips from right to left? Now this movement is going to be a lot smaller, right? As we rotate right to left with the hips, but the knees don't move. So the knee bones stay staring up to the ceiling the entire time, and you can use your hands to help out. Push your left hip down and then come to center, and then push your right hip down and come to center. Do that a couple more times each side. And so can you, even if it's just 1/4 of an inch, move your pelvis without moving your thigh bones? So just know that your pelvis has this mobility to move without your legs moving. Do one more and go ahead and come back to center. Now from here, you're going to tuck the pelvis. It's called a pelvic tilt. Tuck the pelvis so that your low back gently presses to the floor and your tailbone and pubic bone look up to the sky. So when you're in this position, your pubic bone is higher than your two hip bones. And you can use your hands to kind of feel that. And then release back to what we call a neutral spine in Pilates. Do that again. You're going to tuck the tail, lift the pubic bone up to the sky, drop the hip bones towards the floor, and then lift the low back, releasing to your neutral spine, neutral pelvis. 2 more times. Tucking the pelvis, doing that pelvic tilt, And just realize this is different than an imprint. If you are familiar with the imprint position in Pilates, this is a pelvic tilt. There is a difference. It's subtle, but there is a difference. Do that one more time, and then go ahead and come back to center. And since I just mentioned that, why don't we talk about the imprint? So with your hands now resting on your low belly, an imprint is when we start the movement from the waistline versus starting from the legs or the hips. So in that last pelvic tilt, we pushed into our feet. We use our legs to push our low back to the floor and to tuck the tail. Now with an imprint, you start with the belly. You scoop the belly as tight as you can to the low back and feel like the waistline is gently stretching your low back to the floor, and your pelvis responds from that by maybe tucking a little bit. But I hate to use the word tuck, right? Let's go back to our neutral again. Hands come to your low belly. Let's try that again. Use your exhale. Exhale through the mouth. Feel like somebody's punching you right in the belly. The belly button is pulling to the spine, and you should feel that low back lengthen and stretch along the mat. It's gentle, it's small. And because of that, your pelvis tilts just a tiny bit. You're not pressing into your heels. You're not using your legs. You're not squeezing your glutes. Let's come back to neutral. Do that one more time. Feel like you're pulling the belly button away from your hands, down to your spine, lengthening and stretching the spine to the floor. It should feel good. It should feel like a release. And maybe your pelvis tucks a little bit. Maybe it doesn't move at all, right? Everybody's posture is different. And then come back to neutral. So if you have a very arched low back and you have a big space underneath your low back, you may never fully get your low back to the mat. And that is okay. If it never makes contact with the mat, I'm not too worried about that. What I'm worried about is, are you pulling in your core, your abdominal muscles, to support your spine where it's at? And so if you have that flexibility to press the low back to the mat, that's fine. We're not jamming, it's gentle. But if you maybe go, let's just say halfway and you're still a little bit away from the floor, that's okay. Just keep your abdominals engaged. You're still getting that work from the core. You're still protecting the spine. So now I kind of got away from where I was originally going. Let's come back to neutral here. So with all of that we just learned, we're going to still move the pelvis, but instead of tipping from right to left and then doing that back and forth with the tucking, we're going to combine that all together, nice and slow, into a circle. So I want you to feel like your hips are going to be doing the circle. Go ahead and place your hands on your hip bones again so we get that feedback. Let's start in neutral. Can you feel your tailbone heavy onto the floor? From here, we're in a neutral spine. Can you tip your left hip heavier to the floor? You'll feel like a teeter-totter. That right hip just popped up a little bit and your left hip is down, just like a little kid sat on your left hip bone, teeter-tottering to the left. And now can you scoop the belly like we just learned? Pull the belly button to the spine to find your Pilates imprint, right? We're not jamming, we're not pressing into the feet or the legs. And now from here, can you tip over to the right hip bone? So again, think of that teeter-totter. You have a little child sitting on your right hip bone, pushing your right hip to the floor. The left hip lifts a little bit. And then you circle back to neutral, back to your tailbone. Your hips are equal. You're in that nice neutral position. Let's do that again, same direction, a little quicker this time. Let's go to the left. Find that circle. We're going to go to the low back, but it's because your belly is pulling in. Go to the right hip and then go to your tailbone. Drawing that circle in the same direction one more time. Go to the left hip. Go to your low back. Feel the belly pull in tight. Go to the right hip. And then circle to the tailbone. Now let's reverse the direction of your circles. We're at your tailbone. Let's roll the hips over to the right. Feel that teeter-totter position. The right hip is lower. And then roll to your low back because your waistline is pulling in. Roll to your left hip. And then roll to your tailbone. 2 more times that direction. Can you roll to the right hip? Maybe you can feel as if the belly button is doing the movement. The belly button's pulling the right hip down. And now make the belly button pull the low back down. Make the belly button pull the left hip down, and you come back to neutral. 1 more time that direction. Tip the right hip to the floor. Now pull the belly in, low back to the floor. Pull the belly to the left hip tips. And then you come back to your tailbone, back to neutral. So if ever you have any low back tightness or just any strain, this is a great exercise to do. Come down onto a hard floor or carpeting, whatnot, just not on a soft, squishy mattress or bed. Come down onto a hard floor and just feel the circles that you can make with your pelvis. And that's a great release of your low back. It's a great release of the deep internal hip sockets. Now from here, we're finding that neutral position. We're going to do a couple bridging exercises. So place your hands down by your sides.
Remember what I just taught you about the belly pulling in. Stay for an inhale. Exhale, the belly button is going to pull so tight to the spine that the spine lengthens into the floor. You'll feel that gentle tuck of the tail. Let's start to stand into the heels and roll your hips up one vertebra at a time, coming all the way up to your shoulder blades. Now when you're here at your top, you're going to stay for a little bit, and I want you to think about this. Are your thighs still sit bone distance apart, that your knees didn't fall out, right? So feel those inner thighs working. And now check in with your ribs. Make sure that your ribs didn't pop up to the sky. We're not in a back arch or a back extension. We want to be in a neutral spine when we're up in this bridge. So are the front of your ribs in the same placement or level with the front of your hips? Squeezing your glutes. You're lifting from the back of your hips, your butt, versus lifting from your back. Take another inhale. Hopefully you're still breathing. As you exhale, can you melt the chest down away from your chin? Melt the ribs down towards the floor. Feel that belly pull in again. Feel the belly melt the low back down, and then you gently roll all the way down to your tailbone. Let's do that 2 more times. Stay for an inhale. Exhale, tuck the tail, stand into your heels. You're going to engage your glutes a little bit. Pull the belly in tight, scooping the belly the whole time as you roll up. Now again, check out the rim of your rib cage. Just know where it's at. Maybe you want to put your hands there to feel it. Check out the rim of your pelvis. Use your hands to feel it. Are they equal to each other? Are they mirroring each other? Now you stay there at the top for an inhale. As you exhale, feel like somebody's walking down your chest, just stepping down, articulating your spine into the mat, one vertebra at a time, all the way down to your tailbone. Stay for an inhale, find that neutral. Let's do that again. Exhale, tuck the tailbone, scoop the belly, rolling all the way up. Now when you're at the top, you're going to keep your elbows on the mat, but let's bend them and place your hands on your torso. Your thumbs are going to touch the very bottom of your ribs, and your middle fingers are going to touch your hip bones. Feel that space. Can you create more space between your ribs and your hips, which is where your low back resides, right? So can you push your heels a little firmer into the ground and pull your body like you're stretching in the direction of your knees. You're stretching your hips away from your ribs without arching, right? Now your hands are going to stay where they are. Thumbs at your ribs, middle fingers on your hip bones. Stay for an inhale. As you exhale, can you melt the chest and feel how the ribs melt down? You're going to feel the rib bones pull closer to your hip bones as you articulate through that low back. And when you get all the way down to the mat, can you release back into neutral? That means you're finding that length again between your ribs and your hips. Let's do that one more time. I know I said last time was the last time, but I lied. Stay for an inhale. Exhale, tuck the tail. Feel the hip bones pull closer to your rib bones. Start to articulate all the way up. When you get to the top of your bridge, can you pull the hips away so that you create that space again in your waist? Stay at the top for an inhale. As you exhale, can you melt the chest down? Feel the ribs, how they knit and melt down. Feel how the ribs pull closer to the hip bones. As you roll through that low back, your hips and your ribs are relatively close, but then when you roll back down to neutral, you should feel those hips pull back away from the ribs, creating that space. Good, and just hold there. So know where your neutral is on the mat, because when you stand up or when you're sitting or when you're upright against gravity, it's very hard to find this space between our ribs and our hips. Gravity pressing down on us tends to round us, right? So know the difference between this neutral and the rounding. And when you're standing and kneeling and sitting upright, you want to always try to be in that best neutral position. So it's really important that we do all these movements on the mat so that we can teach ourselves how we should be and how we should be moving throughout the day when we're upright against gravity.
There's one more movement I would like to discuss with you today regarding the pelvis. Go ahead and place your thumbs right on your rib cage, the bottom ribs, and place your middle fingers on your hip bones. So from here, we've been here before, and remember, we've done the twisting, the tipping of the hips right and left, and we've done the tucking, right? And so throughout this whole time, you've felt the relationship between your pelvis and your rib cage. On this next movement, I want you to straighten the left leg down, straighten the right leg down, and from here, you're going to try to reach your left leg a little bit longer than your right leg and feel how that left hip has to reach down. It's pushing that left leg longer, and you're creating a lengthening effect in the left side of your waist. Go ahead and come back to center And let's do the other side. Can you reach the right leg a little longer than your left leg and feel how you've created that space in the right side of your waistline, pushing the right hip away from your right rib cage, and then come back to center. Keep going at your own pace and just notice in your own body if you have a difference between sides. Maybe you have more range of motion with one leg than the other. Or maybe you don't feel so much more range of motion. Maybe you feel like the low back is arching more when you reach one leg longer. And if that's the case, that means that your hip isn't necessarily doing the work. Maybe it's tighter on that side and your low back has to compensate for it. So what it does is it arches up a little bit higher from the floor to reach the leg longer versus the actual pelvis moving to push that leg longer. So let's do one more, reaching that leg long. And then go ahead and come back to center. So if you felt your low back arch up when you were lengthening one leg, let's go ahead and add the abdominals in with that so that we can hold that spine nice and neutral with our core. Stay for an inhale. Exhale, pull the belly down and reach the left leg longer as you pull the belly down. Now, again, we're not imprinting, we're not tucking or pushing the low back to the ground. We're just engaging the core to stay stable and then come back to center. Now push that right leg longer, but pull the core in so that your back doesn't arch up. It stays nice and neutral. And then come back to center. Do that one more time each side. Left leg reaches longer, pull the waistline in tight, and then come back to center. Right leg reaches longer, but your abdominals are engaged so that your back does not arch. It stays nice and neutral. And then come back to center. Now go ahead and place your arms down by your sides. Bend your knees one at a time, feet flat on the mat. So we've done a fair amount of moving of the pelvis. In this last exercise, I just want to discuss the stability of the pelvis. So you're going to place your hands back on your hips. Let's focus on keeping the pelvis nice and still. So we know what it's like to move the hips all around, back and forth. We know what it's like to tuck. We know what it's like to hike a hip up and push it down. Now we're going to try to get rid of all of that for this next exercise and try to keep the pelvis rock solid, anchored into the floor without any of those movements occurring. So we're going to really focus on stability. Your hands are coming to your hips, just resting down on your hips just for that feedback so that you can see if your pelvis is moving as your legs are moving. So holding the hips nice and still, let's allow the left knee to open to the left side of the room. With your exhale, you're going to engage the abdominals and slowly pulling that leg through quicksand, come all the way back to center. Go to the other side. The right knee is going to open to the right with an inhale. And now using your abdominals, pull the waist in and drag that right knee back to center. It's slow. I don't want you to use your leg muscles. I want you to use your core muscles. Inhale, open the left knee to the left. Stay neutral in your spine, neutral in your pelvis. Scoop the belly as if you had a string attached from your belly button to the knee, and that string is pulling that knee back to center. Open the right knee to the right with an inhale. Exhale, the belly button's pulling that right leg slowly through quicksand back to center. Couple more times each way. Your hands again are resting on your hips so that you can get that feedback if your hips are moving even a millimeter. Try to keep your hips nice and still as the knee opens out, and you're only going to open the knee out as far as you can stay stable in your pelvis. So maybe you just open an inch. That's okay. So you find your own stability and then work from there. And each time that you do this, maybe you get a little deeper and further into your range of motion. Exhaling to pull back to center. Good. Go ahead and open the right knee to the right. As the right knee opens to the right, your left knee is staring straight up to the ceiling. It's not counterbalancing by falling out to the side, right? Let's do that to the left. One more time. As the left knee opens out to the left, your right knee is staring straight up to the sky. Your abdominals are counterbalancing that movement, not the opposite leg. Go ahead and come back to center and just go ahead and hug your right knee towards your chest and the left knee towards your chest. Wiggle the toes, circle the ankles, move the feet, roll your knees from side to side. Go ahead and turn over onto your sides to sit yourself all the way up. And so we've discussed a lot about just the pelvis, the stability, the mobility. I'm repeating myself over and over, but you can't hear it enough. It's so important because the movement of your pelvis affects the rest of the movement of your body all the way up the spine and all the way down your legs. So when you're moving throughout your day, and maybe you're not moving, maybe you're sitting, maybe you're at your desk and in front of a computer, where is your pelvis in space? Keep a mind's eye on it. Are you rounding back? Are you sitting tall? Maybe you're arched forward. Or maybe a hip is hiked up. Notice how that changes the position of my spine. Maybe a hip is rotated back when you're sitting in your chair. All these things to think about. Your pelvis has a lot of movements, and each movement that it does affects the spine all the way up and affects the legs all the way down. So how can you find your best neutral in whatever you're doing? So just focus on your pelvis. Come back to this video whenever you need. It's kind of a little tune-up for your pelvis, a little reminder of where it's at, what it's doing. And from here on out, for all my videos to come, I guarantee you'll be hearing about the hips and their placement and neutral and how to stay safe in your movements. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day.